The universe stretches out in ways that are impossible for the human mind to fully grasp, an infinite ocean of stars, planets, and galaxies, each teeming with life and civilizations. For millennia, intelligent species have flourished, developed empires, and advanced technologies that far exceed anything humanity has yet imagined. Yet, in the vastness of space, there is one constant, a species from a small blue planet, Earth, whose potential remains largely untapped by the universe at large, in the eyes of alien empires. Humanity has always been a curiosity, a young and primitive species. The first signals humanity sent into the cosmos were met with skepticism, even amusement. They viewed humans as a short-lived, fragile race, struggling to survive against the forces of nature, war, and disease. The idea that such a species could ever rise to prominence in a galaxy filled with far older, more advanced civilizations seemed absurd to them. And yet, there was something in humanity's nature that set them apart, a certain resilience, a drive, that no alien species could fully comprehend. At first glance, humanity seemed unremarkable. Their early years were defined by struggle wars, poverty, and the constant threat of extinction. But even in these dark times, humans exhibited an unparalleled ability to adapt. They could survive where other species would falter, often through sheer willpower and ingenuity. It was this very adaptability that would become their greatest strength. While alien civilizations had long ago established rigid structures, humanity thrived in chaos. Where others saw uncertainty, humans saw potential. This adaptability, this unpredictability, was what the aliens failed to grasp. They could not fathom that in the chaos of human existence lay an extraordinary power, the ability to change and innovate, to come up with solutions to problems that others could not even see. What the aliens dismissed as a lack of discipline, humanity turned into an advantage. Every setback, every failure, was a lesson learned, a stepping stone toward something greater, as humanity began to explore beyond their homeworld, reaching into the stars. With their crude but effective spacecraft, they attracted the attention of the more advanced alien civilizations. The first encounters were not friendly. Most alien species, having seen countless younger races, initially dismissed humanity as just another fleeting blip in the galaxy's timeline. Yet as humans advanced in technology and understanding, something began to shift. Humanity's progress was rapid, almost unpredictable. Alien species watched, unsure whether to feel threatened or simply baffled. Then came the first real test of humanity's potential, a war. A coalition of alien empires, threatened by humanity's rapid rise, decided to act before the human species became a true galactic force. They had watched humanity's technological advancements and saw an undeniable power in their rapid evolution. They feared that this unruly species, with its unpredictable nature and quick adaptability, might one day challenge the very fabric of galactic order. So, they launched an assault on Earth, believing that by striking early, they could extinguish humanity before it ever became a problem. What they didn't anticipate was the human capacity for unity in the face of existential threat. For centuries, humanity had been divided by nations, ideologies, and religions. But when the survival of the entire species was at stake, those divisions vanished. Humanity's response was not one of panic, but of remarkable unity. Earth, once fractured, stood together. Governments set aside their differences, pooling resources to create a defense unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a declaration of human will. The war that followed was brutal and unrelenting. The alien forces underestimated humanity at every turn. They relied on their superior technology and tactics, expecting humanity to crumble under the weight of their power. But humanity's strength lay not in its technology alone, but in its ability to think beyond the conventional. While the alien forces focused on brute force, humanity's ingenuity allowed them to develop new strategies, new weapons, and new technologies at an astonishing pace. Each setback was met with a creative solution, and every alien advance was countered with a human innovation. It was a war of ideas, and humanity proved to be a quick learner. One of the turning points came when humans began to utilize their greatest asset, their ability to adapt. They began hacking into alien systems, disrupting their communications and supply lines. Human scientists developed technologies that allowed them to manipulate energy in ways that rendered many alien weapons useless. Where the aliens relied on vast fleets of ships, humans used guerrilla tactics, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could react. In the face of overwhelming force, humanity was relentless, and their creativity proved to be their most powerful weapon. As the war dragged on, the aliens grew more and more frustrated. They couldn't understand how humanity was able to fight back so effectively. They had never faced an enemy so unpredictable, so determined. Every victory was hard won, and every alien attempt to crush humanity's spirit only seemed to strengthen it. Where other species might have surrendered or been wiped out, humanity fought harder, driven by an unshakable belief that their future was theirs to shape up. By the time the war ended, the human race had proven itself to be an indomitable force. The alien coalitions, once confident in their superiority, were left to lick their wounds and reassess their understanding of the universe. Humanity, having emerged victorious, was no longer seen as a mere curiosity. They had become a threat, a force that would no longer be underestimated. The galaxy had been irrevocably changed, and the rise of humanity had only just begun as humans expanded their reach beyond Earth. They began to explore new star systems, build colonies, and forge alliances with other species. But the war had shown them something crucial. Their greatest strength was not their technology, nor their weapons, but their willingness to evolve, to adapt, and to unite when faced with existential threats. The aliens had tried to suppress humanity's potential, but in doing so, they had only awakened it. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's rise was not a momentary blip, was the dawn of a new era. And in this new era, humanity would not just survive, they would thrive. The war had ended, but for humanity, the fight was far from over. The alien coalitions that had once seemed invincible were now shattered, but their remnants, scattered across the galaxy, still posed a threat. The remnants of their empires, their fleets, their technologies, fragments of power, lurked in the shadows, waiting for the chance to strike back. For the first time, the galaxy's balance had shifted. Humanity, once viewed as an insignificant species, had become a force to be reckoned with. But victory in battle did not guarantee peace. The cost of the war had been high, and though Earth was still standing, its cities scarred, and its people wounded, the question of what came next loomed large. Humanity had proven it could fight, but could it build? Could it establish a lasting peace and rise above the chaos that had defined its past? The first task was to rebuild. Entire cities had been destroyed in the war. Infrastructure lay in ruins, and the human race, though victorious, found itself struggling to restore order amidst the wreckage. But humans, ever resilient, wasted no time in getting to work. The same ingenuity that had propelled them to victory was now directed toward the reconstruction of their world. They rebuilt their cities, their industries, their economies with speed and efficiency that left the alien civilizations watching in awe. While Earth's surface slowly recovered, the real challenge lay beyond. Humanity had learned from its past mistakes, history of division, war, and endless conflict. But the future was now more uncertain than ever. Earth had been the cradle of humankind, but the stars were calling. New worlds beckoned, and humanity's innate desire to explore, to expand, was stronger than ever before. The first step in this new era was the formation of the United Galactic Federation, a coalition of human colonies and factions formed to govern the stars. It wasn't easy. Human history had been defined by division, But the war had united them, and in the aftermath, humanity learned that their greatest strength was not just in their capacity to fight, but in their ability to come together when the need was greatest. The Federation was a new kind of government, one that drew from the lessons of the past, but looked firmly to the future. Yet not all were eager to embrace this new vision of unity. A faction of former military leaders, who had risen to prominence during the war, saw the formation of the Federation as a betrayal of their hard-earned victories. They believed that humanity's success in the war had been because of their power, their superior military strategies, and they feared that a unified federation would dilute their influence. This faction, known as the Earthward Coalition, called for the establishment of a human empire, one where military might ruled, and the galaxy would be conquered through force. The Earthward Coalition's rise was swift. Many of those who had fought alongside them during the war saw their vision as the only path forward. To them, peace was a fleeting ideal, and the galaxy could only be secured through strength. But the Federation, backed by the majority of humanity's leaders, opposed them. The battle for humanity's future was just beginning, and then there were the aliens. The galactic empires that had once sought to crush humanity now faced a new reality. They had underestimated the human race, and in doing so, had made a grave mistake. Many alien species, though bruised from their defeat, still believed they could outmaneuver humanity, perhaps through diplomacy, perhaps through subterfuge. The alliances that had formed to fight humanity now splintered, each faction scrambling to salvage its own interests. In particular, the Xalan Empire, one of the largest and most powerful of the defeated coalitions, began to regroup. The Xalan were an ancient species, ruthless and calculating, with vast technological knowledge. They had been humiliated by humanity's unexpected resilience, and in the years following the war, they began to rebuild in secret. Their goal was simple: revenge, unknown to most. The Xalans had a plan, a secret weapon that had been in development long before the war had even begun. It was a technology so powerful, so dangerous, that it could potentially undo everything humanity had fought for. The Xalans knew that their previous attempts at direct conquest had failed, but they were patient. They understood that in order to defeat humanity, they needed to attack not from the outside, but from within. The plan was simple, yet terrifying. They would infiltrate the human colonies, sow discord, and create divisions. Their goal was to fracture humanity from within, to turn the newly formed Federation against itself. For years, the Xalans had been sending covert agents, disguised as diplomats, traders, and even common citizens, into human territory. Their mission was to manipulate and control, to instigate tensions between the various factions of humanity, and to stoke fears of an impending alien retaliation. But the Xalans underestimated the very thing that had allowed humanity to survive the war: their instinct for cooperation in the face of adversity. As the alien infiltration began to unfold, humans, ever watchful, began to notice subtle inconsistencies. Minor tensions between colonies were being stirred up, but the Federation's leaders were quick to act. An elite team of human intelligence officers, skilled in the art of counterintelligence, quickly identified the Xalan agents and began systematically eliminating their presence from human colonies. The Xalan Empire's efforts were met with fierce resistance. Humanity's capacity for self-preservation, honed through years of war, was now its greatest weapon. The alien attempt to fracture humanity only solidified their resolve. For every agent they planted, humans exposed 10 more. For every plot the Xalans schemed, humanity turned the tables, pushing back with surprising ingenuity. However, this was only a small part of the greater picture. The Xalans were not the only threat. The galaxy was full of species that had watched humanity's rise with envy, fear, and admiration. Some, like the Akram, a technologically advanced but morally ambiguous race, saw humanity as a potential ally in their own expansionist ambitions. Others, like the ruthless Darwins, believed that humanity's strength could be harnessed and turned against their enemies. The battle for the future of the galaxy was only just beginning. The war may have ended, but the real challenge for humanity was only now unfolding. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about shaping the future of the galaxy, and whether humanity would remain united in the face of the unknown. The galaxy, once a distant dream for humanity, now lay before them vast, uncharted, and teeming with life. What had once been a universe of awe and mystery had become a stage for humanity's ascension. But with power came responsibility, and the challenges of the stars were not as simple as they had first appeared. The human race, though united in purpose, found itself facing conflicts beyond anything they had anticipated. As the United Galactic Federation grew, it became clear that there were deeper, more complex issues to address than just the threat of alien empires. The vastness of space brought with it new questions. What did it mean to be human in a galaxy full of different species? Could humanity remain true to itself in the face of such enormous change? These questions would define the next phase of humanity's journey, one in which their survival would no longer be the sole concern. Now, the focus shifted to the preservation of humanity's identity and values in a universe where power, influence, and control were the true currencies. Within the Federation, there were those who believed that humanity's destiny lay in expansion. This faction, known as the Expansionists, viewed the stars as an endless frontier. Their goal was to push beyond the boundaries of what humanity had already established and colonize distant star systems. They saw the galaxy as a blank canvas, a place where humanity could shape its own future. To them, the key to humanity's survival was dominance, a belief that the galaxy's countless worlds would be best served under human leadership, even if that leadership was achieved through force. Opposing the expansionists were the preservationists, who feared that humanity's rapid expansion would lead to its downfall. They believed that the lessons of the past, particularly the war against the alien coalitions, had shown the importance of caution. The preservationists argued that humanity's strength lay not in its ability to conquer, but in its ability to form meaningful, peaceful relationships with other species. They believed that if humanity was to thrive in the galaxy, it needed to foster cooperation, not domination. These two factions, each with their own vision of humanity's future, clashed more and more as time went on. Tensions within the Federation reached a boiling point. The expansionists advocated for the construction of a massive fleet of warships and colonization ships, while the preservationists pushed for diplomacy and peacekeeping missions. The rift between the two groups threatened to tear apart the very foundation of the Federation, and there were whispers that the Federation itself might collapse under the weight of internal conflict. At the same time, humanity's position as a galactic power was being tested by the rise of new and powerful enemies. The Xalan Empire, though fractured and weakened, was far from defeated. As the Xalans licked their wounds and began rebuilding, they began to forge new alliances with other species who saw humanity as a threat. The Xalans had learned from their past mistakes and knew that brute force alone could not bring humanity to its knees. They needed to outmaneuver humanity, to strike at the very heart of its unity. In the midst of this growing tension, a new enemy emerged from the dark corners of the galaxy, the Korak, a race of merciless nomadic conquerors, who had been watching humanity's rise with growing interest. The Korak were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. They were brutal, savage, and highly skilled in the art of war. Their ships were designed for fast, devastating raids, and their warriors were known for their savagery and ruthlessness. The Korak had no interest in diplomacy or trade. They came to conquer, to take, and to destroy. Unlike the alien coalitions that had attacked humanity in the past, the Korak did not seek to negotiate or strike alliances. They saw the galaxy as theirs for the taking, and their first target was humanity. The Korak launched a series of surprise attacks on the outer colonies, raiding peaceful settlements and leaving destruction in their wake. Humanity was caught off guard. The Zalan Empire, having secretly aligned with the Korak, provided them with valuable intelligence and resources, allowing the Korak to strike with deadly precision. The Federation's fleets, still recovering from the previous war, were ill-prepared to deal with this new threat. For the first time since the end of the Galactic War, humanity found itself on the defensive. The Korak were relentless, and their raiding parties hit faster than humanity could respond. The outer colonies, especially the newer ones, were left vulnerable. While the Federation scrambled to send reinforcements, it became clear that they had underestimated the true scope of the Korak threat. The nomadic invaders had no regard for the Federation's authority and no interest in negotiating peace. In the face of this new threat, the Federation's internal conflicts reached a breaking point. The expansionists argued that the only way to deal with the Korak was through force an all-out military campaign to wipe them out before they could do more damage. The preservationists, on the other hand, insisted that the Federation should seek allies among other alien races, that humanity should try to build alliances to defeat the Korak, rather than resort to violence. The division between the two factions was now a full-blown crisis. But amidst the political infighting, a group of human military leaders emerged, those who had fought in the previous war, veterans who had seen what humanity was capable of when it stood united. These leaders formed an unofficial alliance, not bound by political factions, but by the belief that humanity's survival depended on their ability to act swiftly and decisively. They advocated for a united front, not just against the Korak, but against any force that sought to tear humanity apart. Their message was clear. The galaxy was no place for division. Humanity could not afford to be fractured when there were enemies waiting to strike. As the Korak raids grew in intensity, humanity was forced to make a decision. The Federation, though divided, rallied its forces together. The call went out across the galaxy. Humanity would stand united against this new enemy, regardless of the political differences that had once threatened to tear them apart. The battle for humanity's future was about to enter a new phase. The Korak had underestimated the human spirit, just as the alien coalitions had before them. They believed that humanity would crumble under the pressure of invasion, that they would falter like so many species before them. But they did not account for one thing. Humanity's greatest strength was its unity when everything seemed lost. And so, as the Federation's fleets assembled, ready to confront the Korak threat head-on, humanity was forced to confront its own inner demons. In the face of extinction, would they choose to fight as one, or would their division be their downfall? This was the test that would shape their destiny, one that would define whether humanity could truly conquer the stars, or whether the stars would ultimately conquer them. The threat of the Korak had forced humanity to confront its most difficult question yet. Could they remain united in the face of overwhelming external danger? The galaxy was a place of both opportunity and peril, and humanity had quickly learned that its survival was dependent not only on their strength, but on their unity. The Korak, with their devastating raids, were the first real test of this unity. But it was also a test of humanity's adaptability that had already been proven on countless occasions, both in the past and in the war against the alien coalitions. The Federation, though fractured, managed to set aside its differences. After weeks of bitter debates, the expansionists and preservationists reached an uneasy truce, agreeing that the Korak threat was too great to ignore. Military leaders, diplomats, and scientists from across the Federation came together, pooling their resources and their knowledge in a desperate attempt to forge a united front. Their goal was simple: eliminate the Korak, or, at the very least, push them back to the edges of the galaxy. But unity came at a cost. The first major battle between the Federation and the Korak would take place in the Harvan cluster. a region of space known for its dense asteroid fields and valuable resources. The Karak had already launched several raids on the outer colonies, and they had set their sights on Harvin. The Federation's military leaders knew that if they lost Harvin, they would lose their foothold in the sector. The war for humanity's survival would begin here, and failure was not an option. Humanity's forces, though united, were still recovering from the previous war. Their fleets, though strong, were stretched thin, and the Karak, with their nomadic tactics and unrelenting aggression, were a force unlike any the Federation had ever faced. The Federation's fleet, led by Admiral Kira Solis, a seasoned veteran of the last war, was tasked with defending the Harvin cluster. Admiral Solis knew that the key to victory lay in outsmarting the Karak. Their raiding tactics were brutal but effective. They would strike quickly, with overwhelming force, and then retreat before the Federation could mount a proper response. But Solis had learned the value of unpredictability during the previous war, and she was determined to use that to humanity's advantage. As the Federation's fleet approached the Harvin cluster, they knew they were walking into a trap. The Karak had anticipated their move and were waiting. Solis had no illusions about what was at stake. This battle would decide the fate of humanity's future. If the Federation fell, humanity would be forced into a defensive position, forever, on the back foot. But if they could defeat the Karak here, they would secure their place in the galaxy and send a message to any other potential threats. Humanity would not be easily defeated. The battle began with a fierce exchange of fire. The Federation's warships, though more advanced than the Karakis, were still vulnerable in the close quarters of the asteroid field. The Karak ships, smaller and faster, darted in and out of the dense field of asteroids, making it difficult for the Federation's larger, less maneuverable ships to land effective hits. The Karak knew how to use the environment to their advantage, making every move unpredictable, every shot deadly. Admiral Solis had anticipated this. She ordered the Federation fleet to split into smaller squadrons, using the asteroids as cover. The Karak relied on their speed, but the Federation would rely on precision and coordination. The battle raged for hours, both sides exchanging fire in a deadly game of cat and mouse. But the Karak made a critical mistake they underestimated: humanity's ability to adapt. The Federation's engineers had developed a new weapon, designed specifically for close combat in environments like the Harvin cluster, a series of energy-based harpoons, capable of ensnaring enemy ships, were deployed to great effect. These harpoons latched onto Karak vessels, rendering their high-speed maneuvers useless. Once ensnared, the Karak ships were vulnerable to concentrated fire from the Federation fleet. The tide of the battle shifted, but the Karak were not easily defeated. They fought back with brutal determination, using every weapon at their disposal to break free from the Federation's grip. The Federation's fleet was pushed to its limits, with heavy losses on both sides. Solis, though battered, remained focused. Her strategy was working slowly but surely. The Federation was gaining ground as the battle reached its climax. A Karak flagship emerged from the shadows of the asteroid field, larger and more heavily armed than the other Kaesharak ships. It was a force to be reckoned with. This flagship had been the leader of the raiding parties, the heart of the Karak offensive. Its presence on the battlefield signaled the endgame for both sides. Solis knew this was the turning point. The Federation's forces, already strained, could not afford to be distracted by other threats. She ordered the full might of the fleet to focus on the flagship. The battle was a brutal one. Each shot fired at the flagship was met with a retaliatory barrage. The Federation's warships, already weakened, were pushed to the edge of their capabilities. But Solis was relentless. She knew that victory here would secure humanity's place in the galaxy. In a final, desperate move, Solis ordered a kamikaze strike on the Karak flagship, a Federation cruiser. Its weapons exhausted and its shields failing, was directed straight at the flagship. The Korak flagship, seeing the approaching ship, attempted to evade, but it was too late. The Federation cruiser collided with the flagship in a massive explosion, taking both ships out of the fight. The shockwave from the explosion sent ripples through the battlefield, throwing both Korak and Federation ships into disarray. The sacrifice of the cruiser, though costly, turned the tide. With their flagship destroyed and their forces in disarray, the Korak were forced to retreat. The Federation, though battered and scarred, had won the day. But the cost of victory was high. Many ships had been lost, and the Federation's military was severely depleted. Yet, despite the losses, the battle for Harvan was seen as a major victory for humanity. The Korak had been defeated, at least for now, and humanity had proven its strength. The Federation's unity, forged in the fires of war, had held together under the most extreme circumstances. But there were still whispers of uncertainty. The Xalan Empire, though weakened, had not yet shown its full hand, and the Korak would not be the last threat humanity would face. For now, humanity had secured its place in the galaxy, but as the Federation's leaders looked toward the stars, they knew that the future was still uncertain. The road ahead would be long, and the galaxy was a vast and dangerous place. But humanity had survived, and as long as they stood together, they would continue to rise. The victory at Harvan had been a turning point, a much-needed boost to humanity's confidence. The Federation's forces had repelled the Korak invaders, but the galaxy had not quieted down. In fact, the chaos following the battle opened the door for even more complex problems to emerge. Humanity, once a small and divided species, was now in a position to shape the future of the galaxy. But this newfound power came with heavy burdens. The first was the aftermath of the Korak invasion. Though they had been pushed back, the nomadic conquerors had not been eliminated. The Federation had claimed a temporary victory, but the Korak had retreated to their hidden strongholds, regrouping and preparing for their next move. It was clear now that the Korak weren't just a threat to human colonies. They were a challenge to the very idea of peace in the galaxy. Their savage, unpredictable tactics would not allow for a simple resolution. They would return, and when they did, humanity needed to be ready. The second issue was one that had been simmering beneath the surface for months: the growing divide within the Federation itself. Despite the temporary truce between the expansionists and preservationists, cracks were beginning to show. The two factions had worked together to defeat the Korak, but their underlying differences could not be ignored. The emboldened by their success, began pushing for a more aggressive stance in galactic politics. They wanted to increase humanity's presence across the stars, colonizing uncharted systems, establishing military outposts, and expanding the Federation's reach. They argued that the galaxy was too dangerous to remain passive, that humanity's survival depended on establishing dominance and securing strategic locations before other species could do the same. The preservationists, however, believed that this aggressive expansion would only lead to more conflict. They wanted humanity to focus on diplomacy, on building relationships with other species, rather than conquering more worlds. To them, the Korak threat was still fresh in everyone's minds, and the Federation had to recover, regroup, and foster peaceful alliances. They saw the expansionists' agenda as reckless, potentially leading humanity into another galactic war. It was a dangerous game, one that could tear the Federation apart, if not handled carefully. But there was an even darker force that loomed on the horizon: the Xalan Empire. Though weakened by the war, they had not been eradicated, and their leaders were watching humanity's every move. The Xalans were a cunning species, with a vast network of spies and operatives scattered across the galaxy. They had been humiliated in the previous conflict, but their pride was far from broken. They had regrouped, formed new alliances, and begun secretly rebuilding their strength. The Xalan leadership knew that humanity had proven itself to be a formidable force, But they also believed that humanity's divided factions could be exploited. The Xalans had a deep understanding of human nature. They knew that when divided, humans were vulnerable. One of the most dangerous aspects of the Xalan strategy was their ability to manipulate information. They began spreading disinformation, planting rumors and false reports within the Federation to further fuel the divisions between the expansionists and preservationists. They seeded mistrust, creating an environment where paranoia flourished. These efforts were subtle at first, but over time, the political landscape within the Federation began to shift. As the Xalan propaganda spread, more and more leaders in the Federation began to question the motivations of their allies. What had once been a united front was now a fragmented coalition, vulnerable to internal strife. Meanwhile, the Korak had not been idle. The Federation's victory at Harvin had not gone unnoticed by the nomadic invaders. Their raids had been a way of testing humanity's resolve, and now they knew that humanity could, indeed, fight back. But the Korak were not interested in simply raiding human colonies. They had seen the potential in humanity, and they wanted more. The Korak emissaries had begun approaching other alien species, attempting to form alliances of their own. The Federation's victory had only made the Korak more determined to secure power in the galaxy, and they were willing to do whatever it took, including forming alliances with enemies of humanity. With both the Xalans and the Korak preparing for new moves, the Federation found itself in a precarious position. On one hand, they were militarily strong, having successfully repelled the Korak. On the other hand, the divisions within their own ranks were threatening to tear the Federation apart. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive, was whether humanity could remain united long enough to defeat the threats it faced. Admiral Solis, the hero of Harvin, now found herself in the unenviable position of trying to hold the Federation together while dealing with a multitude of challenges. She had been promoted to the position of Supreme Commander of the Federation forces, a responsibility that was both an honor and a curse. She was a woman of action, known for her unyielding determination. But now she was faced with the impossible task of navigating a galaxy filled with hostile factions, internal divisions, and a growing sense of distrust among her own people. Solis knew that the key to humanity's survival lay not just in defeating external enemies, but in overcoming their own internal divisions. She set out to bridge the gap between the expansionists and preservationists, using her position and influence to promote dialogue and collaboration. It wasn't easy. Each faction had its own vision for the future, and neither side was willing to back down. But Solis understood one critical truth. Humanity's strength was in its unity. If they were to face the challenges of the galaxy, they needed to work together. But even as Solis worked to keep the Federation united, the Xalans made their move. Using their network of spies, they launched a series of covert operations to undermine Solis' efforts. They planted operatives within key political and military positions, feeding misinformation to both sides. The goal was clear: to destabilize humanity from within, to ensure that the Federation would collapse under its own weight. The Xalans had learned from their past mistakes. They would no longer rely on brute force alone. Instead, they would wage a war of subversion, targeting humanity's weaknesses, as Solis fought to keep the Federation from falling apart. She discovered the extent of the Xalan influence. The whispers of dissent that had begun in the Federation were not the product of internal struggle alone. The Xalans had been carefully manipulating the Federation's factions, playing on their fears and ambitions to create division. Solis knew that if she was to prevent humanity from being torn apart, she needed to expose the Xalan plot and rally the Federation's leaders against the common enemy. But even as Solis worked to uncover the truth, a new threat emerged. The Korak, seeing the Federation's internal strife, made a bold move, one that would shake humanity to its core. They launched a direct assault on the Federation's capital, a brutal attack that tested the Federation's unity like never before. The Korak were not simply raiding this time, they were sending a message. Humanity's success at Harvin had been a fluke, they believed. Now, they were going to prove that humanity was nothing more than a fleeting power, a species that could be easily crushed. The stage was set for the ultimate test of humanity's strength. Would the Federation remain united in the face of this new threat, or would it fall victim to its own divisions? Solus knew the answer depended on one thing: humanity's ability to rise above its differences and face the galaxy as one.